Hello everyone, welcome back to the Beginner's Guide to Assassins / Junglers. And we are going to be talking about Assassins this time. Now that I've talked about how Conquest basically works, again, I can't really get into the specifics of necessarily your route or your ganking pattern or your farming pattern, because that's going to be unique to you and the circumstances, a combination of the two. And now that we've also talked about team fighting, which is a little bit more universal, I want to talk about assassins before we really clean up team fights in Arena, because there's some things you really need to understand about assassins in general. Now, for the purposes of simplification, I'm going to, in this episode, broadly classify assassins into three broad types: auto attack, ability, and flexible. Alright? And it's very important that I make this distinction, because at this point in the meta, Season 7, auto attackers have, broadly speaking, a very weak early game. The reason for this is because most of them really don't have excellent wave clear. Actually, let me rephrase that. They don't have excellent camp clear. They've got very weak camp clear. I'm going to take a couple of prime examples. Arachne is one. Her kit relies very heavily on her auto attacks. Her passive utilizes basic attacks. Venomous Bite triggers off of auto attacks and has very low scaling. Cocoon increases her attack speed and also triggers off of auto attacks. Her spiders do nothing. And Nightcrawler is the only thing that really has nothing to do with auto attacks. Web has uses, but in terms of combat, not really. So, as you can see from all these abilities, there's not really any AoE here. Web can contribute a certain amount of damage to a camp, but not really enough that you want to rely on it. It's only really useful until like level 3. And it'll only be useful past that if you put points into it, which decreases your ganking potential, really. Most of the time, anyways. I have seen early game, and I have played early game web boosts where it's been very effective, but that was in a different season. It's not as effective in the current meta. But anyways, back to the point. In order for auto attackers like Arachne to actually clear fast enough to keep up, they need to build, very specifically, the Golden Blade. Now, why not Oboe? Well, Oboe doesn't really give you any kind of move speed, it doesn't give you any physical power, both of which are things that auto-attacking assassins really want. And while the benefits of this aren't high on Golden Blade, it's only 10% increased move speed and 30 physical power, it's still better than what Oboe is going to provide you. Yes, Oboe provides you with attack speed. Yes, it provides you with an interesting passive that bounces from victim to victim. Golden Blade is still better for camp clear. Oboe is instead useful in what you will purchase first on auto-attacking assassins in Clash or Arena, where you're not clearing camps, you're trying to clear waves. And also, if you decide to bring an auto-attacking assassin into the solo lane, you're also going to use Oboe there as well. But for camp clears, you're going to be building Golden Blade. Now, the problem with this is Golden Blade very rarely translates particularly well into the late game, because a lot of the time, even in team fights, enemies aren't standing close enough to actually trigger Golden Blade a lot of the time. Maybe you'll get some bonus damage on a support, or from a support to another nearby ally, because supports tend to hang pretty close to one of their allies, possibly some from the solo, but I find that a lot of the time, a lot of players at this point have really understood to not necessarily be standing too close together in case of AoE attacks from the mage, so this is kind of hard to pull off, and for most situations I will sell this in favor of something else in the late game, because this is only really something you want to clear camps. This is personally what I use Golden Blade for. I know some people like to keep it and do very well with it. I'll only really keep it if the enemy team has a minion summoner like Arachne, Nuwa, Tiamat, etc. Golden Blade can be very effective in those situations, but even then, Oboe is honestly just as effective, if not more effective in those circumstances. It really depends on how you personally prefer. But the need for Golden Blade is going to slow you down compared to a lot of other assassins who are going to jump right into Yotens Wrath, which provides more power, it provides a little bit of flat pen, and it provides cooldown reduction. Right? And if you don't build Golden Blade first, you're going to have a harder time farming the jungle. Now, there is a way around this, but it takes practice with that particular auto-attacking assassin, and the solution is get your ganks, right? If you're really good at ganking people, and you can carry off some really risky ganks and succeed, you can keep up with the enemy even without building Golden Blade. This is a very risky scenario because as I discussed in the first 2 episodes of this series, the problem with ganking is that it depends primarily on how well your allies are doing. If they're doing too well, the opponent's close to their tower and it's going to be much harder to gank them. Alright, now Arachne actually has an answer to this as an example, and several auto-attacking assassins do have a kit that's actually fairly decent for this. But if your opponent, if your ganking target is under tower, throw your web down, activate Venomous Bite, run in behind your spiders after your spiders have chewed them once, hit them with the Venomous Bite, ult out. Alright, if they die, great, you've got the gank. If they don't, well, there's not really anything else you can do. Maybe you dive back on them with Nightcrawler, but you'll probably get killed afterwards if they have any backup. If not, then maybe it's a safe move. It depends on your health at the time. But that is a possible solution, right? And then turn around and talk about Mercury, who's got similar issues. He does have Made You Look, but it takes too long for this to reach an AoE effect and a damage output that actually makes it effective at camp clear. So often I do build Golden Blade, and you'll find a lot of other Mercury players building Golden Blade for that reason. Made You Look just takes too long to build up to that point. But he's got his ult Sonic Boom, run right through the tower, hopefully taking the enemy with you. Maybe you hit them with Made You Look. You know, you've got some options there. But that's really the problem with auto-attacking assassins, right? Kali also has the same both issue and solution. She's unkillable when she's got destruction running. So you do have that benefit of 4.5 seconds at max rank, but obviously in the early game you're not going to have that. You're going to have the 3.5. So, but she does have that potential solution for diving under the tower and finishing them off if you need to. The other type of assassin are ability-based assassins. These are assassins that really almost exclusively utilize their abilities, or their auto attacks are more of a side note. Particular standouts are Bastet, who pretty much doesn't do anything with her auto attacks. Her entire kit does not care what her auto attacks are. And she's, very effective as well. Ratatoskir, I very rarely pay any attention to his auto attacks. He can be built that way, it's just not how I play him. He's technically a flex. You've got Susano, who does have the ability to... Yeah, just, this is pure ability. I was remembering his old passive, actually. But he's pure ability as well. You might build Hydra's Lament to be able to do some extra damage in between ability uses, but he's an ability assassin, honestly. So you do have that, and then you have the flexible assassins, which are a majority of them. Sirket, Raven, Ratatoskir, like I said before, Pele, Nemesis, Naja, Thanatos, they can all utilize Set, even Thor. They all either do utilize or can utilize some combination of their abilities and auto attacks, right? And this allows you to play them as you like. Maybe you start out in the early game focusing on the abilities because that's better for your camp clear, and then you transition to mixing in some auto attacking because that's potentially a little more effective in the late game depending on how the enemy is building, what you build, etc. So, why is this important? Well, ability-based assassins are generally going to be better at camp clears than auto-attackers, and flexible assassins can really do whatever. Ability-based assassins still do a fine job of ganking. I'm not saying that they're worse at ganking than auto-attackers. It really depends, again, on the context. For example, for a nice ability assassin, let's say Susano. He's got a lot of hits, he has a teleport, he has the pull, very effective on that score. Bastet is very safe, she jumps in, she throws some cats, she causes bleed, and then she leaves. So it's very... Right now, because of the way that auto-attacking assassins are kitted, they really have to rely very heavily on ganking to keep up farm-wise. Because, especially in the early game, because they have to build a Golden Blade if they want to keep up with farming the jungle. So there is that issue. But besides that, I do want to talk about some particularly standout assassins that are particularly useful either in Conquest or in other modes. And I actually want to talk about Arachne again for a second, because Web actually offers you some very interesting options. Now, you'll remember from the first 2 episodes that I mentioned that assassins should really be trying to ward as much as they can remember to, in my case, or they should be trying to ward as much as possible. Well, the Web acts like a free ward. Technically, it acts like 3 free wards, right? Although you can only have, once you fire the third one off, your first one goes away. So I only usually leave 2 down. Usually I'll put them somewhere around mids, that way it's very easy, because a lot of people pass through mid, obviously, so putting down some webs in mid is very helpful, and this also allows your allies to play a lot safer, and it's actually easier to arrange a effective gank with web, even with strangers, even with randoms from just regular matchmaking. Ideally, you would still want allies that you can actually play with, because auto-attacking assassins kind of rely on, good ganks, and if you're communicating with your allies effectively, then that's easier, obviously. But Arachne is probably the only auto-attacking assassin who doesn't really heavily rely on communication, because there's free communication via the webs. So it is very helpful for that reason, and she is underrated, but she takes a lot of practice to master. Alright, she's a very high skill level to play really effectively. She's not at her strongest right now. Like I said, auto-attacking assassins in general are in a rough spot right now in the early game, but if you can get her to the late game safely, she's very potent, especially with the Predator passive, which, once you build in size, that is a huge damage buff every time you hit them with an auto-attack. Let me just hit puberty there really quick. So just keep that in mind, that out of all of the auto-attacking assassins, in my opinion, Arachne is the strongest. I will eventually be making a series around her. Beyond that, the problem here, though, is that she is only really effective in Conquest for that reason. She is to some extent effective in Clash. You can put webs down in the little middle jungles, which is somewhat effective, especially if it's in the enemy's middle jungle area. But outside of Clash and Conquest, she's really not great. I don't take her into Arena. I tried it. I tried very hard to make her work in Arena. It's yes, I had good games, yes, I had bad games, but really, ultimately, she's just not designed for Arena, and she's just not really strong in the role. She could even potentially be useful in Joust by blocking off the Bull Demon King, or whatever the map happens to call it, using webs. That's very effective as well. But don't ever take her in Arena. Every other mode she has some function in. Obviously, Conquest is her best mode, but don't take her into Arena. Please, save yourself the sanity. Beyond that, it is worth mentioning that Ratatoskir can flex into a variety of roles thanks to the versatility of the nut. Will you highlight, please? There we go. As you can see, you can build him pretty much any way. Obviously, if you're playing Assassin, you're leaning more towards either the Bristlebush, the Bristlebush, or the Thistlethorn Acorn. Which one you use is totally up to you. It depends on your personal preference. But if you're playing an assassin, or if you're a jungle main, but you are really concerned about getting into a role that's out of your position, put your secondary role as solo and play a tankier Ratatoskir with either the Evergreen Acorn and the Thickbark Acorn. And I'm going to be really blunt with you. Every jungler main should have a really strong grasp of Ratatoskir as a back pocket assassin. What I mean by back pocket assassin, I've actually talked about the back pocket god selections for a while now, and I've never actually clarified this, but a back pocket any character is really somebody who can bust out when you're really out of position. Let's say you play ranked, this is also the character you're going to fall back on if your Norm gets banned or picked. This is just sort of your backup. Or you should obviously have several backups, to be completely honest, but Ratatoskir is one that every jungle main should know. Unless you really hate his kit, and even then I would still urge you to try him a lot. The versatility of his Acorn means you can rotate into the solo lane and cover that position if you are not able to be the jungler main, and you can still play an assassin, you can still do really well. You're just going to be building different, okay? I do recommend Ratatoskir as a back pocket assassin for every jungler. What your main jungler is, if it's not Ratatoskir, whatever your main jungler is, that's fine, but have Ratatoskir in the back pocket in case you are shafted to the solo or even the support role. He actually makes a decent support as well. The only other real standout assassin I want to talk about is Bakasura, who is a little bit more effective than other auto-attacker assassins in Arena and Clash. That's not to say he's good in these roles. He's very weak right now, unfortunately. It's not a good meta for him. at this time, but he does perform better in Arena and Clash than, say, Mercury or Arachne do. So if you really must play an auto-attacking assassin, if you must play an auto-attacking assassin outside of Conquest, he's really what you're going to be going to, but even then, again, there are better options. When I'm playing non-Conquest, I do tend to go for Raven, Fenrir, or Ratatoskir. Personally, Nemesis is also a strong choice, and what these all share in common is a higher than average ability to defend themselves. When Fenrir ults, he gets doubles protections. Raven has a passive health shield that he gets from his passive. Nemesis steals protections, and she's also got the reflection shield. These are just slightly tankier than average assassins that I really enjoy playing in much more team fighty games, such as Clash and Arena. Now, you're going to be told, if you're, and I'm sure there probably is going to be a comment at some point, people will tell you that Sirket can make a good support. No. I strongly disagree with this, because she hasn't got the crowd control, she doesn't have the default protections, she has nothing with which to really save herself in an ugly situation. This not only puts the enemy sitting in place, which is the idea, but it also locks her into place, right? Which is a problem. Her only crowd control is Cobra's Kiss, which only lasts less than 2 seconds. It doesn't even last a second and a half, for Pete's sakes. She doesn't have the crowd control to support. I know people are going to tell you she's good in support. That time has passed. That was a past time, and people are just trying to relive the glory days of support Sirket. Those are gone. Don't play her in support. Same thing with Fenrir. Fenrir people have played as support, and he is effective in the early game because he hits like a steam train in the early game, but again, he just doesn't have consistent crowd control. I talked about this in the support beginner's guide as well, but it's worth covering here. He's got a sometimes stun on his leap, which is also your escape, so that's fairly risky for someone who isn't a guardian. And Ragnarok is incredibly effective at singling out an enemy target and bringing them back to your team. This is great, but 2 crowd controls and lower than average protections for a support role does not a support make. That, again, that time has passed. Now, what you're going to really find overall is that a lot of the flexible assassins can go into a couple of different roles. I remember way back in the day, back when Made You Look used to trigger item effects, right? It used to trigger basic attack item effects, which means it could critical hit and it could trigger chin size and etc. And I used to be able to play him in ADC role with that, but since they removed that, he's much harder to play in that role. Still possible. And he's the only non-ranged character I'll play as ADC to this day. But it's more difficult now, and I haven't done it in a while. But it's also worth noting that a lot of these assassins, especially the flexible assassins, do really well with Hydra's Lament, which you'll find a lot of people building for an extra bit of power in the middle of a fight. Pretty much everyone who isn't purely auto attack is going to be looking for this, and even the auto attackers can benefit from Hydra's Lament. So getting down to the actual specific items, I'm just going to use Robin because I know his stuff is all empty. Actually, no, we'll use Ratatoskir just for kicks. You're going to find that Hydra's Lament is very popular amongst assassins. Most assassins that aren't auto-attacking assassins will start with Yotens Wrath, and this is primarily for a combination of the power, the mana. Actually, all of its core stats are very useful. The power obviously means you do more damage, which makes ganks better. It makes you clear faster. The mana is really good for sustaining in the jungle. You can stay out longer. You can farm for longer. The physical penetration is, again, really good for ganking. And the cooldown reduction is not only good for ganking, but it is also really good for recharging your movement ability, whatever it happens to be. In Ratatoskir's case, it's his dash that allows you to traverse a little bit faster in times of great need, right? So you have that, and then they'll usually follow it up with Hydra's Lament, not only for the passive damage bonus, but also the cooldown, again, the MP5, and the passive granting extra MP5. Again, if you want to be really effective, you're going to be using your movement ability to be zipping around the jungle as quickly as possible, and having Hydra's Lament and Yotens Wrath, plus Goombas Dagger usually is what I go for, is all going to really help you boost up your mana to the point where you can stay out longer. And this is important because you'll notice under Goombas Dagger, 10% of the monster's health is given to you as healing, but only a flat 25, regardless of how much mana the monster has, because obviously the monster doesn't have mana. That is a flat 25 mana, not a percentage, which means it's not scaling into the mid to late game. So that's why a lot of assassins right now are building some early game mana and early game mana regeneration so that they can stay out for longer and be more available for ganks and to farm the jungle a little bit longer, etc. That is the goal here. Beyond that, what you want to build outside of those two really is going to depend on how you want to play, right? And maybe even as the circumstances require, depending on your situation. If you're behind, you're going to be more reactive to the enemy if you're behind. If you're ahead, you're not really going to care too much about what the enemy is building. You're just going to kind of try to plow through them and bulldoze. Now, I do want to give a word of warning, because I've seen this quite a decent bit, and I sometimes do this myself, but it's very rare. But I have seen assassins try and build Transcendence early game. This is very risky, but potentially very rewarding. Now, if you can successfully build and stack Transcendence in the early game, you're going to have a huge mid to late game boost on the enemy. You're going to have the power that you're looking for out of Yotens Wrath. You're going to have the mana you're looking for out of Yotens Wrath. You're going to have at least some of the cooldowns, and you're going to have a little bit of the MP5. This is absolutely a huge advantage if you can pull it off. The problem is that stacking as a jungler is a little bit more difficult, and if you fall behind, it's going to be even more difficult, because if you fall behind, the enemy jungler is probably stealing your precious jungle camps, right? Making it even harder to stack this. So you have to be really sure you're going to be ahead of the enemy. This is a much safer bet if you know the enemy jungler, or if you figure the enemy jungler is going to be a non-assassin. You're going to have a little bit of a movement speed advantage over them, and falling behind isn't as easy for a slower character to punish in the jungle role than it is for another assassin. So this is a better risk against a non-assassin enemy jungle, but it's still a gamble, and it is going to either pay off really big, or it's going to absolutely crash and burn. And there's really no happy mediums that I've ever experienced personally or seen. So just keep that in mind. If you notice the enemy jungler is building Transcendence and you are not, focus them down. Hunt them down and kill them once, maybe twice. Force them to fall behind, and then start stealing their jungle once you're ahead. Because if you can deny them their jungle, they're going to have an unevolved Transcendence just sitting in their inventory, sitting in their item slots for a long time. And that's really what you're looking for, right? So if you are not building Transcendence, and they are, play very aggressively. Get those kills, get those ganks, get them down, right? Another popular, by the way, item is Serrated Edge, mostly for the physical penetration. This is also more popular with... actually, it's pretty popular with pretty much everyone, except for the purely ability-based assassins, who are generally going to go not necessarily into this. They might go into Titan's Bane specifically, but it provides a lot of physical penetration, some nice movement speed, some physical lifesteal. This is very popular for these reasons. You don't have to build it, but it is very popular for those reasons. Soul Eater is equally popular for the same. You will see a lot of assassins building something out of this as well for a little bit of a physical damage boost. Usually they're just going to go into Shifter's Shields, so that way they can pop in for their high amount of damage, blast their whole kit in the face of the squishies in the late game, and then by that time they'll have been knocked down past 75% health, and they'll be able to escape with 40 extra protections in each protection, right? Shifter's Shield is unusually valuable for assassins for that reason, because a lot of the time your escape ability is also your initiation ability, and once your support is in a fight, you need to be in there killing those squishier targets fast. So you pop in, blow your kit while you have the extra 30 power, and then when you fall, you've blown your kit, you've taken out the enemy mage and the enemy hunter, you book it with the increased protections, because you don't want to be standing around for the enemy assassin or the enemy solo lane to lock you down and finish you off. Alright, it is very effective for this reason. I tend to only really build this, though, in physical heavy enemy comps, which is honestly most of them, because most compositions in Conquest are going to be one of each class, and there are 3 physical classes and 2 magic classes, which means there's a predominance of physical damage on the enemy team, plus the physical damage from towers and minions. So, overall, I'll usually build Shifter's Shield in those circumstances. auto-attack focused assassins might instead go with Berserker's Shield. That's, again, a personal preference. And ability-based assassins might instead want to go into Glad's Shield. Again, personal preference. I very rarely do this, though, because I often don't have the protections to justify that, unless I'm Fenrir, honestly, or Robin. But you do have those options. Alright, so that is really... That's some of the more unique ones. Now, I do want to talk about Thanatos as well, who I think is also a... If you play ranked, Thanatos is an excellent back pocket assassin. In case the enemy team has Khepri, who is an absolute nightmare to deal with in ranked, and I think he's very underrated right now. But if the enemy team does have a Khepri, Thanatos is a really great back pocket assassin to have to use. He's also very fast. He's probably the second fastest assassin because he can just spam his second ability, which gives him a movement speed boost, and that movement speed boost is increased if someone near death is in front of you. So if you're approaching in the broadly direction of somebody who's within kill range, instant kill range of your ult, you move faster. So he actually roughly matches Mercury in speed depending on the circumstances. So he is very fast. He hits very hard. Takes a bit of practice, but he is extremely good. And again, if you play ranked specifically, he's someone you should have in your back pocket. Him and Ratatoskir. Beyond that, it is worth noting, I'm actually going to mention this really quick. You'll notice Shingetsu's next basic attack becomes ranged here. Mengetsu's next basic attack becomes ranged, right? Hydra's Lament. This is a connection a lot of people make but don't talk about, and beginners may not understand this, but you're basically getting a ranged Hydra's Lament on his kit, and it's worth mentioning this. This is why he's very popular right now. I just wanted to mention that really quick. As you can see, I'm still in the process of building a setup for him. Anyways. Ultimately, that's really a lot of the particularly unique points that I wanted to make here in this video. It is worth mentioning Loki becomes invisible if you're really into that. He's okay right now. He's a lot of people, out of pure hatred for him because of a long history of him being scary, a lot of people will say he's worse than he is. He's decent. Very middle of the road right now. He's not super weak, but he's also not strong either. Very middle of the road. And don't let people tell you, oh, Loki's the worst. He's not the worst assassin. Alright. In my opinion, the worst assassin right now is Bakasura. He's in a very weak position. Loki's fine. He's okay. But yeah, I suppose it's also worth mentioning that Camazotz has absolutely incredible sustain with the Essence Drinker, and the fact that he's got two different ways of restoring his health, one through Vampire Bats and another through Devour. Beyond that, there's not really a whole lot else going on here. A lot of these assassins do honestly sustain themselves. Thanatos has a self-heal in his Death Scythe, for instance. Pele's got Lifesteal on her passive. But these are really the ones that I wanted to specifically mention. But regardless of what assassin you main, I want to reiterate this. Understand Ratatoskir at the very least. Be able to play him decently well. Because if you want to main jungle, just accept, if you want to main any role, accept that you're not always going to get that role, and have someone in your back pocket to play. And this wasn't really as much of a concern with support, because support is still the least popular role, so support mains really don't have to worry too much. And solo players can always rotate very easily into the jungle, because a lot of warriors are really great. I might have mentioned this in the beginner's guide to solo, if not I'll talk about it in the advanced. But a lot of warriors do very well in the jungle as well. And the reverse is true for assassins. They can play very well in the solo role if you build them right. And Ratatoskir, in my opinion, is one of the best at that. Alternatively, you could go for Raven, but Ratatoskir happens to also... Well, both of them also make excellent supports. I just find that Ratatoskir is a bit easier to realign into that role rather than Raven. So, I mean, if you wanted to use Raven as your back pocket assassin, that's fine. He's similarly effective in the role. I just find Ratatoskir a little easier to, I think, for beginners to understand how to get him to an out-of-jungle role. But yeah, you should have one of those two. Absolutely have one of these two in your back pocket. And then whoever your main is, use them as well. But understand how to play them. both in jungle and out of jungle. Alright? That's all I really have to say about Assassins at this point in time, so thank you very much for listening, and if you like this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, requests, or anything else, please leave them down in the comments below, and thank you very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.